What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Warden Healer. This is sort of my take on the Stamina Warden Healer. If you guys have kind of followed this build, the few iterations that I do have on this channel, you guys will take note that it is not necessarily what I would call a pure Stamina Healer. It's something a bit of a hybrid build. The goal behind this build is to primarily use our Stamina as our main tool of healing, but also try to not give up too much of the benefits of running a healer, namely things like minor vulnerability, minor berserk, and resource return through orbs. So it's a bit of a challenge to basically create a healer build that basically focuses on using stamina but still has enough magicka that we're able to use things like orbs and combat prayer fairly regularly, so that way we're still able to provide the buffs that are pretty unique only to healer specs. So while this is a stamina based healer, it's more accurate to call this more of a hybrid class, hybrid healer with a bigger emphasis on the stamina rather than magicka portion here. So this particular build is more of a for fun build. It's a fairly off meta build. It's not really going to win you any favors in terms of progression guilds. However, if your raid lead, if your raid group is comfortable with bringing in sort of a fun build here and there, and by all means, you can definitely bring this build over. I have not really tested this out in any of the harder vet trials, but you can probably clear things like the vet Craglorns using this build fairly easily. Healing in this game, in terms of just raw healing per second done, it's actually fairly easy to do. It's mostly the buffs that really kind of it's more difficult to maintain on a stamina healer, so that's why you don't really see them being used too much in sort of the harder vet trials, and especially in score runs and end game trials groups. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We'll be going over a little bit of gear substitutions you might want to consider making. There isn't really that much flexibility with this build. Again, we are focusing mainly on stamina, so there's not too much we can do to swap out in order to kind of make sure this build still retains enough healing power, but also enough magicka to basically be of use, to basically have enough utility for the group itself. So there are a couple of sets that we can kind of swap out here and there, but it's generally your sets are pretty much going to be fairly static. Then we'll go over skills, and just like our other support roles, I will be going over the various skills that you will need to have in order to basically play in any vet trials group. And then, because healers obviously don't have a rotation, instead of kind of going over the philosophy behind healing, my philosophy behind healing I should say, and kind of what goes through my mind when I'm healing a vet trial. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So like I mentioned earlier, in terms of gear, you'd have definitely less flexibility than a full light armor magicka healer, and that's just because we want to maintain 5 medium armor so that way we get the 50% additional weapon damage bonus from agility. So we basically need to have 5 medium armor pieces, so that pretty much limits the set that we can wear on our body, because as you can see, we have a monster helm set. We still want to do 5-1-1 in order to gain max resources, so we're basically limited to basically one of 2 different sets here. Both of them are going to be very useful in terms of providing group utility though, so it's definitely not necessarily what I would call a bad trade-off. It's just something that you have to keep in mind if you are going to be running this build. So the body set that we're going to be running is going to be Scavenging Demise. So this is a new set, so this does come from Depths of a Malatar, which is a new dungeon, so you do need to have access to Wrathstone if you want to run this set here. But this basically acts as the stamina healer version of Infallible Aether. So it gives us weapon damage, 2 weapon crit, but the 5-piece, when you deal critical poison damage to an enemy, you summon the Scavenging Maw, who, after 2 seconds, attacks the enemy, dealing a certain amount of poison damage and inflicting minor vulnerability for 15 seconds. So this basically, like I said, acts as Infallible Aether, just for stamina healers instead. Critical poison damage, as long as you have poison injection up, you should be able to get those off pretty easily. Critical poison damage, you don't have quite as high crit chance as a typical stamina DPS, so won't necessarily be able to proc every on cooldown, but it does last for 15 seconds and the effect occurs every 10 seconds, so you do have that 5 seconds of additional leeway to basically re-proc the set. So even though you don't have as high crit and you really only have one source of poison damage, at least in this particular setup, you should be able to get pretty good uptime on Scavenging Demise nonetheless. So very, very nice set to include into the game for kind of the stamina healers side of things. Now, if you don't have access to Wrathstone, there is another set that you can run that is still medium and still provides good group utility as well. And this is a base game set. Let me just see if I have it here or not. Here it is. So it is Hircine's Veneer. So this can be found in Selene's Web. So this is a base game set. So it gives you stamina regen, max stamina, and stamina regen again. And then the 5-piece reduces the cost of your stamina abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. So very nice to have if you have a lot of stamina DPS in the group. That basically gives them a little bit more sustain, additional 4% cost reduction in their stamina abilities. And of course, this also affects you as well. Sustain on this particular build is going to be a little bit challenging to do, mainly because we're a hybrid build, so we kind of have to juggle two pools of resources. So this does give you a little bit of additional leeway when it comes to basically managing your sustain overall. And this is a medium armor set, so this can be worn on the body in order to get that agility passive from having 5 medium armor slots. Now for our must-have sets, your must-have sets are pretty much identical to Magicka DPS, or I should say Magicka healers. So we're running Bogdan here. Bogdan's still a very nice set, even on a stamina healer. The good thing about healing is that it basically, while the healing moves do scale off of weapon damage and max stamina, healing proc sets like Bogdan, Sentinel, Earthgore, they just are affected by healing done and healing received modifiers. So these are going to be just as effective as on a Magicka healer. So that's why all the monster sets that we're going to be going over are identical to the ones that you would run on a more stereotypical Magicka healer. Bogdan Night Flame, base game set, you can get this from Elden Hollow 2. It's probably going to be one of the stronger healing sets in just terms of raw heals per second is done. So while it does only have a 5% chance to proc whenever you heal a friendly target, do note that it's every single heal. So if you, for example, cast Vigor and you manage to hit 6 people with it, each of those 6 people has an independent 5% chance for it to proc. So the uptime on Bogdan is actually going to be fairly high as long as you have all of your hot sticking like Vigor, if you have mushrooms and things like that going out. So it's one of the stronger monster sets in the game. The other options again are pretty much identical to Magicka healers. So you have Earthgore, so this is from Bloodroot Forge, so you do need to have access to Horns of the Reach DLC in order to grab this set. Very good burst heal, but it does have very long cooldown, so just keep that in mind if you do want to use Earthgore. This is going to be more useful in things like Asylum, Cloud Rest, where you want the additional burst heal and don't necessarily need a constant heal like Bogdan. So this is a little bit more situational than Bogdan, but still very good nonetheless. Then you have Sentinel Rkugamz. This is another base game set, so this comes from Dark Caverns 1. So it's basically a slightly weaker version in terms of healing compared to Bogdan, but it does provide additional stamina to everybody within that healing circle. So it's a 5-meter radius, very similar to Bogdan, but it does heal for less, 1332 here, compared to about 4400 on Bogdan, but it does restore that additional stamina. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS, this provides some additional utility as well. And then you have Symphony of Blades. So this is a new monster set. This also comes from Depths of Maltar, so while you're farming for Scavenging Maw, you can also try to get a Symphony of Blades helm by running this on vet. When you heal an ally who's under 50% of their primary resource, which in this case is defined as Magicka or Stamina, health is not considered a primary resource. You grant them Meridia's Favor, restoring 23-25 Magicka or Stamina, whichever maximum is higher every second for 6 seconds. This effect can occur every 18 seconds. So again, a very nice set to have, very good for 4-man content, but if you're going to use it in 12-man content, it's ideally used with a bunch of other people also running this monster helm set. If you think about it in terms of how many DPS you can hit, one Symphony of Blades can only affect 1 out of 8 DPS, but if all of your support roles, all 4 of you guys are wearing Symphony of Blades, then 4 of your 8 DPS are able to get the proc every 18 seconds. So it's not very strong by itself, at least in 12-man content, but when you combine it with other Symphony of Blades on support roles, it becomes pretty potent. So you definitely want to pick this up if you get a chance to do so. So those are your primary monster helm sets here that you're going to be running as a stamina hybrid healer. Now for our second set, this second set is going to vary a little bit depending on basically what your other healer is going to be running. So I have Olorime. This is the perfect version. You can go with the imperfect version if you would like. Olorime has largely supplanted Spell Power Cure as the primary source of Major Courage, so you do want to make sure to pick up Olorime at some point. So you will need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to farm this set yourself. So again, I have the perfect version, but you can go with the imperfect version if you are not able to get this set. Now Olorime does come in light armor, so you will need to get the jewelry and you'll need to get the bow and a restoration staff. You don't necessarily need to get a restoration staff because at least Olorime, you could use the sound restoration staff like I have here, and I'll go over that in a little bit. But you definitely want to pick up at least, the very least, a bow for Olorime here. Now, other sets that you might want to run are pretty much, there's not that many out there. If you want to primarily do sort of a stamina DPS, stamina healer kind of sort of setup. The only other set that you can really potentially run on the front bar here is if you're running Hircine's Veneer, you could run instead something like Infallible Aether instead. Let me see if I can find it first. Infallible Aether, I believe, is called, it's not called Infallible Aether here, it's called something else, but I'm blanking on the name. Where are you? Infallible Mage, here it is. So Infallible Aether is another set you could run. Again, you would want the jewelry and a bow. This also provides minor vulnerability on your heavy attacks, so you will need to, basically, you shouldn't run this with Scavenging Demise, because then you're just doubling up on the same debuff. If you're running Infallible Aether, you would be running Hircine's Veneer instead. So this does come with a Prevalent Trial, so this is a base game set. So for those of you guys who don't have access to any sort of the DLCs, you can run something like Bogdan's with Hircine's Veneer and Infallible Aether, so that way you're kind of maximizing your overall group utility while you're doing so. So that's one potential option there. You could also run Jorvuld's Guidance instead. So this is a dungeon set, so you do need to farm it from Skullcrawler Peak. It's a light armor set, so again, you will need to get the jewelry and then the bow at the very least. You might also want to get a restoration staff as well. So this adds 2 Magicka Regen and additional 2% healing done. And this increases the duration of all major buffs, minor buffs, and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. So this is really going to be used with Warhorn, because Warhorn does provide a major buff, Major Force. This basically buffs the duration of Major Force, basically giving you DPS more time, more Major Force uptime, which gives you more DPS overall. So Jorvuld's Guidance is another potential set that you might want to pick up as well. But like I said, there aren't that many options out there because a lot of the healing sets in this game are more light armor sets, so there's not really that many good ones out there for a stamina healer here. Now, in terms of weapons, like I mentioned earlier, you do want to have a bow on your front bar here, and then on your back bar, I like to run the Asylum's Restoration Staff. So I have the perfect version here. You don't need to have the perfect version. You can go with the imperfect version if you would like. So the perfect version, whenever you cast Combat Prayer, it reduces the cost of your magic and stamina healing abilities by 30%. The imperfect version reduces it by 27%. Pretty small difference overall. So this just helps out your sustain overall. Again, we do want to try to maintain Combat Prayer as best we can. It could be a little bit difficult here on a Stamina Warden, Stamina Healer, just because obviously we're not using Magicka primarily to heal. So a little bit tricky, so that's why we're using the Silent Restoration Staff that also allows us to use orbs a little bit on the cheaper side, so that way we're still able to pump out at least some orbs here and there, so we're not giving up too much when it comes to resource return. Now, if you don't want to run the Asylum Restoration Staff, you can just run your second set instead, so you can run instead Olorime if you so desire in this instance. Now, for traits and enchants, so I have Infused Large with Prismatic enchants, and then for our small pieces, so I have Divines, and then I have 2 Stamina enchants and 2 Magicka enchants. Again, this is more of a hybrid style build, so we want to kind of make sure we have really good pools of Magicka and Stamina, but we do still want to have good higher stamina, obviously, because this is more of a stamina-oriented healing build. Now, you can also replace this with Prismatics as well. It's basically the equivalent of running 1 Magicka, 1 Stamina enchant, and 2 health enchants, essentially. 2 health enchants. This will give you a little bit higher health, so it'll give you more survivability. But as you can see here, because of the food that we're running, our health is actually pretty high, so you don't really need to run Prismatics, if at all, actually. So you could feasibly replace these Prismatics with Max Magicka or Max Stamina enchants. Probably Max Stamina if you want to kind of focus in on the stamina, or Max Magicka if you want to provide more group utility. Now, for jewelry traits and enchants, this was actually really difficult for me to kind of figure out, because again, I want to maximize our overall group utility, but also not sacrifice too much when it comes to healing strength. So basically what I boiled down to was 2 traits that you're going to want to use. So in Triune and Infused are probably going to be your best options here. Triune is basically a prismatic enchant just for jewelry, and then Infused increases your jewelry enchantment effectiveness by 60%. The other options that I kind of went through were some sort of combination between arcane and robust, but it's a little bit tricky to kind of find a good sort of compromise there, so I just went with Triune instead, because at least with Triune you get both Magicka and Stamina. You also get a little bit of health as well. But again, you can run, again, same sort of concept here. Because of the food that we're running, you can run just pure arcane or pure robust if you want to get those max resource pools out of it. And again, enchants was really tricky for me to figure out, because we still want to get good Magicka Regen. As you can see here, I have a Magicka Regen glyph here, because again, we still want to maintain Combat Prayer as best we can. We still want to maintain Orbs as best we can, so we do want to have some Magicka available to do that. At the same time, we still need some stamina recovery as well, because we are using stamina as our primary healing pool here, so we'll want to get that stamina regen going as well. And then we also still want to get some good weapon damage, so we also want to have a weapon damage enchant in there as well. So I went for one of each, but you can kind of mix and match them based on how you feel, based on what you feel that your build in particular lacks. Because we have Olorime, again, because a lot of the other sets you're going to be running that are not body sets do have Magicka Regen built into them, you might not necessarily need to run a Magicka Regen glyph. As you can see here, we do have about 1300 Magicka Regen and 1050 Stamina Regen, so pretty decent regen overall. Not quite as high as on like a pure Magicka healer, but still very decent nonetheless. Now for weapon traits and enchants, again, this is really tricky because again, we want to maximize utility, but we still also want to basically maximize our stamina healing potential. So I went with double infused instead. So on our back bar, I did a weapon damage enchant, so this basically increases our weapon and spell damage for some more healing strength, so that way we're not giving up too much in terms of healing power. On our front bar, again, infused with, this time I had an absorb Magicka enchant, because again, I still want to be able to use Combat Prayer, Orbs, and those primarily obviously use Magicka. You can replace this enchant though, so other enchant options that I kind of floated around. Absorb Stamina, same sort of concept, we just want to make sure we have stamina in order to heal ourselves, and then Shock Enchant in order to maintain concussed uptime to help with off bounce. But the thing with Shock Enchant is that you're basically going to have somebody else run the blockaded storms instead. So it's basically going to be your other healer or one of your Magicka DPS instead. So it might be better off to run that Shock Enchant on your Magicka healer instead, because their CPs are going to be a little bit more effective with that way. But it's kind of up to you, so it really boils down to absorb Magicka, absorb stamina, maybe Shock if you'd like, weakening Crusher potentially, weakening if you want to reduce the damage that's incoming to the group. Crusher is, it's something that you might want to consider picking up. It's going to be a little bit situational. Basically, Crusher enchants on the sword and board bar and tanks has been cut in half as of Wrathstone, so a lot of tanks are switching over to using Crusher solely on their staff backbar or bow backbar to get that full Crusher enchant strength, but it might be a little bit tricky for them to maintain that uptime, so having another infused Crusher on the healer might be beneficial as well. So that's pretty much it for our gear. Let's go over our character sheet real fast. So I am an Imperial, so I did kind of bounce around a little bit between races, but I settled on the Imperial for a couple of reasons. So we'll really quickly go over to the racial sheets here. The Imperials, you will need to get the Imperial Edition if you want to play as an Imperial. If you can't get the Imperial Edition, then your next best option is, unfortunately, probably going to be Redguards or Bretons, depending on whether you want to go more utility-oriented, which would be Bretons, or if you want to go more pure healing-oriented / sustain-oriented, which is going to be the Redguards or the Orcs. But I went with the Imperials for a few reasons. First of all, you get some additional health. Always a good thing to have as a healer, just gives you a little bit more survivability. Second thing is you get more max stamina, so it just again helps out your overall healing strength. But the big reason why Imperials I think are going to be the best option here is going to be the Red Diamond passive. So this is a flat reduction of 3% across all of your abilities. Stamina, ultimate, Magicka, doesn't matter, roll, dodge, blocking, they all get affected by Red Diamond passive. So it's just an overall benefit to your sustain. And on top of that, when you deal direct damage, you heal yourself for 422 and restore 333 Magicka and stamina. So unlike Bretons, which are purely Magicka sustain, or Redguards or Bosmer, who are purely stamina sustain, Imperials sort of kind of bridge that gap a little bit. They get both Magicka and stamina back with the Red Diamond passives. That's why I decided to go with Imperials. Another race that you might want to consider running is more of a hybrid race is going to be the Khajiits. So they get 825 health, Magicka, and stamina. They get 85 stamina and Magicka regen and a 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional crit healing done. So Khajiits are another potential option you might want to consider, just because they do get, again, sort of that hybridization going on. They get some Magicka, they get some stamina, they get some regen for both, and they get 10% additional crit healing. So you're still getting a little bit of additional heals, just not very, it's not quite as strong as the 2000 max stamina you would get like on an Imperial here. But that's why I'm going with Imperial for this particular build. For attributes, we're pouring all points into max stamina here. We're getting max Magicka from other means, Prismatic enchants, Triune glyphs, other armor sets, so don't really need to put any traits into Magicka here. Again, our max health is perfectly fine with Prismatic, so we don't really need to put any points into health here. For Mundstone, going with the Ritual, this is pretty much as agnostic as you can get. If you want some additional stamina regen, you can go with the Serpent. If you want some more Magicka Regen, you can go with the Atronach. But again, those are more kind of like single resource oriented versus the Ritual, which kind of bridges that gap a little bit. It basically doesn't really care whether you're using a magic or stamina heal. It just increases the amount of healing done you. So very, very nice Mundstone to run here. And for food, this was really tricky to go for, because again, this particular build is focused in on basically providing as much group utility as we can, sacrificing as little of it as we can, so we still get Comet Prayer, we still get Orbs, but we still want to maximize the amount of healing we can do, so we still want to get those max stamina pools as well. And unfortunately, the only food that I can think of that would really be useful here would be the tri-food. So purple food, max health, max stamina, max magicka. You can run something with Dubious Command Throne for the max health, max stamina, and stamina regen, but then you're giving up on the max stamina pools and the stamina and the magicka regen. I tried Jewels of Misrule, which gives you max health and magicka regen and stamina regen, but I found that the loss in max resources was a little bit too much, so I just decided to go with this fairly safe option, which is just purple tri-stat food. Then I am a vampire. Vampires can be very helpful here because it gives you both magicka and stamina regen 10% as long as you're stage 2. You will take a little bit more damage from fire, so just bear that in mind if you do decide to be a vampire here. The 10% does actually make a little bit of a difference here, so definitely want to try to pick up vampirism if you can. Now for our skill bar, starting off with our front bar here. So this is our bow bar. We have Soothing Spores. This is going to be kind of your burst heal here. Poison Injection, this is to help proc Scavenging Demise. Endless Hail, this will help proc our enchants. Full Netch, this is obviously for the additional stamina sustain. Echoing Vigor, this is going to be our another one of our, I don't want to say burst heal, but this is going to be your heal over time. And we have Enchanted Forest, so ultimates do scale off of your highest max stat, so it's still going to be useful, but it's not going to be quite as strong as on a pure Magicka healer, because Magicka healers obviously can just dump all their traits into one, focusing on spell damage and max Magicka, versus here we have to kind of split our traits a little bit, so it's going to be a little bit weaker compared to like on a Magicka Warden healer. On our back bar, this is the Restoration Staff bar. We have Energy Orb. Despite the fact that we're not a Magicka healer, this is still going to be a very strong heal that you want to use. It also returns resources, so if you don't want to give this up. Overflowing Altar, this is for the minor lifesteal, as well as this additional synergy. The synergy is a flat percentage increase, the percentage heal done, so it's useful across all the boards, and it is scale off of the synergy user, not the synergy caster. So doesn't matter if you're Magicka or Stamina or a tank or a healer, it'll always be able to heal for that same amount, depending on who's activating it. Comet Prayer, this is our source of minor berserk. It's not going to be a very strong heal, as you can see here, 3640 compared to Soothing Spores, which is 7218. We have Shadow Silk. This is to provide additional synergy to our ranged DPS if you have any bow builds. This is kind of a flex spot here that I have back here. If you do have bow builds though, Shadow Silk is going to be fairly strong, so definitely want to try to keep that up. And then again, this is another flex spot here. We have Green Lotus. This basically causes your light and heavy attacks to heal you or nearby ally for 20 seconds. Again, a bit of a flex spot here. It just gives you additional healing strength. Bow light attacks are the fastest light attacks in the game, and you should be weaving, so you will be able to get additional heals with every single weave that you do. So basically, you can basically think of it as your light attacks are now healing people, as long as you have Green Lotus up. Now, I mentioned that you have 2 flex spots, arguably 3 if you want to swap out Overflowing Altar for something. So you do have 3 flex spots here. And on the front bar, these pretty much are not flex spots at all, so I would not consider these flex spots. You have 3 abilities that you can swap out here. So in terms of flex spots, you can go Deep Fissure or Subterranean Assault. It really depends on sort of your group setup. If you have more Magicka DPS, Deep Fissure is going to be stronger. If you have more Stem DPS, Subterranean Assault will be stronger. This is just AoE Major Breach or Major Fracture, so very nice to have, especially for trash pulls here. If you need additional speed boost for whatever reason, you can go with Bird of Prey or Deceptive Predator. Deceptive Predator is going to be a little bit more useful because of that minor evasion compared to the minor Berserk from Bird of Prey, but because you're a stamina healer, you can kind of think of yourself as sort of an off DPS, so Bird of Prey might not be a bad option either to give yourself a little bit more damage. Under Green Balance, you could run Budding Seeds if you would like. Again, this provides an additional synergy for the tank to proc Alkosh, and again, synergies are based off of whoever uses the synergy, not your stats. So this can still be a very potent heal for magic DPS that happen to use a synergy. So you might want to consider running Budding Seeds. Downside is this does use Magicka, which you do want to conserve primarily for Combat Prayer and Energy Orbs. You don't want to run Overflowing Altar for the amount of lifesteal. You could run Leeching Vines instead for the lifesteal, but again, this uses Magicka, so not quite as useful here. And you can also run Expansive Frostcloak, so this basically grants Major Ward and Major Resolve to everybody around you. Very, very nice to have, mainly because DPS, some classes do have access to Resolve and Ward. I'm thinking of mainly Nightblades and Templars, but other classes don't have ready access to Major Resolve and Major Ward. So this basically gives your group a little bit of additional survivability, so very nice to have. This does use Magicka, but you only need to cast it every 24 seconds, so not quite as big of a deal here. If you do want to help out your tank and chaining things in, you could run Frozen Device if you would like. It does use Magicka though, so just bear that in mind. Determining Shield, if you do happen to find yourself being targeted by projectiles, it gives you major heroism, which is always a nice thing to do. Faster Warhorns, more major force uptime. Under the bow bar, you can run Acid Spray or Bombard if you would like, and you can move one of these abilities, obviously not Poison Injection or Endless Hail, to the back bar. So Acid Spray will basically give you better chance to proc Scavenging Demise, but Bombard does immobilize, so it does act as a little bit of a CC, so that's always nice to have as well. And then on the Rest of Staff bar, you can run basically any of these Rest of Staff abilities here if you would like. So you can run Healing Springs, you can run Mutagen, but these are not going to be very strong heals because you're primarily using your stamina to heal instead, so I would not recommend running these. But you can run Light's Champion here on the back bar instead of Aggressive Warhorn, and move Warhorn to the front bar instead if you would like. It really depends on which ultimate you're going to want to prefer to use. Light Champion is going to be more useful in 4-man content compared to 12-man content, versus Trees, which is going to be more useful in 12-man content. Trees is also cheaper compared to Light's Champion, but Light's Champion does provide major force and major protection, so just something you want to keep in mind here. Unfortunately, you do not have access to a shield because you do need to have 5 pieces of light armor equipped in order to use Dampened Magic, so we're not able to use that. But you can get Major Evasion instead through either Elude or Shuffle if you would like. And then under the Fighter's Guild line, Ring of Preservation for the minor protection for those stacking and executes. Nice to have, but you're not really going to be using this all too much. I can only think of really 2 or 3 fights where you end up using Ring of Preservation, but it's still something you want to consider having just on hand. And then Bone Surge for the Major Vitality buff. So this is, if you need a shield, this is going to be the build you're going to be running for your shield. It uses stamina rather than Magicka, and it doesn't require you to have 5 pieces of light armor equipped. It also provides additional synergy, which provides an additional damage shield to up to 4 other people around you, and gives the Major Vitality, which increases the healing received by 30%. So it just makes your heals a little bit stronger that way. And then under the Alliance War line, you might want to consider getting Reviving Barrier for additional Magicka Regen from Magicka Aid. And you definitely want to get Efficient Purge as well for those instances where you do need the group purge. Now moving over to our champion points. Again, this is a kind of hybridized build, so we are going with a little bit of a split CP here to kind of maximize our healing on both ends here. So the CP cap is still 810. They didn't change the CP cap between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so we have 270 points to split across our 3 different constellation colors. Starting with our green CPs, I have 64 Mooncalf, 64 Arcanist, 49 Tenacity. Then I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 31 Warlord. So managed to get all of my jump points here. So this is probably going to be the best sort of distribution you can have here. Now for our blue CPs, 75 into Blessed, 81 into Elfborn, 81 into Precise Strikes, and then I put the remaining 33 points into Piercing here just to help out our DPS a little bit. And for our red CPs, I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now, this is not going to maximize your mitigation across any sort of specific trial necessarily, so if you do need to shift red CP points around to maximize your mitigation for specific trials here and there. So again, this is very different from your typical Magicka, pure Magicka healer, because we do need to kind of maximize on both ends, stamina and Magicka, so that's why we have 81 Precise Strikes, 81 Elfborn to kind of both deal with both Magicka and stamina. And the same thing here, 64 Mooncalf and Arcanist for both Magicka and stamina. Alright, that's pretty much it for the builds. Let's go ahead and talk about the kind of philosophy behind healing that I do here. Now, normally, healing in ESO pretty much boils down to really you have two main jobs. In order of importance, obviously, first one is to heal your allies, make sure they're not going down. But if you're able to basically keep them up the whole time, then your next major priority is going to be buffing and debuffing. So healers in ESO are not just pure heal per second robots, basically. You guys are more or less going to be buff and debuff, which is why this is more of a hybridized build. So again, the goal behind this build was to primarily use stamina as our main healing resource, but without giving up too much of our overall utility as a healer. So we still have Scavenging Demise in order to get a minor vulnerability. We still have Comet Prayer in order to get minor Berserk. We still have Orbs here and there. Now, of course, the downside is because we don't have as much Magicka as a pure Magicka healer, we will be depending a little bit more on a Magicka healer partner. We have a Magicka healer partner to basically provide those additional resources. The general rule of thumb here is you always want to make sure you have Endless Hail down. This is your primary way of basically proccing your enchant on your bow bar. Endless Hail will proc on whichever enemy is closest to the center of Endless Hail, so just make sure you have that centered on the boss, so that way you're able to basically proc it on the boss at all times. And then you want to make sure you have Poison Injection up as well if you're running Scavenging Demise. That way you can have their critical poison damage ticks to help proc Scavenging Demise that way. Now, in terms of heals, Vigor is a 5-second heal, so just bear that in mind when you are using Vigor. It's not going to be a very burst heal. If you want to use a burst heal, you will need to use mushrooms instead. So Vigor is going to be more for a heal over time. Now, Vigor does heal only 6 people at a time, so just bear that in mind. It will target the people with the highest stamina first, I believe. Just keep that in consideration. You might need to move around a lot in order to basically use Vigor, because it is centered around you. Now, we are using Echoing Vigor compared to Resolving Vigor, so we do have quite a bit of range with it. But you will need to have to move around a little bit more compared to a Magicka healer, because a Magicka healer can just throw springs basically wherever they want, versus you, where you have to actually move because Vigor is centered on you. Now, for the back bar here, if you are running Green Lotus, try to maintain it as best you can. And again, while you are basically healing, you just want to make sure you're light weaving between your skills here. So on your back bar, when you're throwing out orbs, do Comet Prayer first if you are using the Asylum Restoration Staff, and then do 2 orbs afterwards. So it would basically be Comet Prayer and then 2 orbs immediately afterwards. That way you get that 30% or 27% reduction on the orbs cost that way. Again, only really want to do this if you are running the Asylum Restoration Staff. If you're not running the Asylum Restoration Staff, then just bear in mind that your orbs are going to be more expensive that way. So if we go ahead and take a look at how quickly we're able to get our Magicka back up, we do need to be in combat to get actual realistic Magicka Regen. So you can see here that we drop down about 40% max Magicka that way. A little bit tricky here in order to basically get our Magicka all the way back up to full. So just bear that in mind here. You will not be able to pump out nearly as many orbs or quite as many Comet Prayers as a pure Magicka healer. So just keep that in mind. Just make sure your other healing partner is aware of that, so that they will need to pump up more orbs than usual, because you will not be able to really provide that at all as a stamina Warden healer. Other than that, there's not much I can really say without actually showing you guys actual healing, and unfortunately I do not have a stamina Warden healer on live that I can actually heal content on. So my best recommendation would just be to kind of play around with this build. Again, this is an off-meta build, so you're not going to be seeing endgame raiders really run this. This is going to be more for sort of for fun runs, for sort of those groups that are more relaxed, more casual, not necessarily worried about, you know, score or anything like that, or times or anything like that. So again, there's not that many good stamina healers out there that I can think of that stream on a regular basis. So the best thing that I can recommend is just play around with this build and kind of tweak its strengths and weaknesses to kind of suit your group's needs. That's it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Feel free to leave questions and comments down in the comment section below. If you guys have any questions, I will try to answer them to the best of my abilities, and try to clarify things as well, to the best of my abilities here. Stamina, Warden, healer is obviously not my main. Again, hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.